right, Mike, welcome to Firm and Final. How you doing?
I'm doing good, man. Thanks for having me on the show. Appreciate you.
Yeah, no problem. It's been a long time since our Mercer days. You've come a long way. I see all the work you're doing, all the hard work you're putting in online to attract new prospects and show plans and plan sponsors how to finance their healthcare. And you popped up as somebody that I wanted to talk to for this podcast. So thanks for joining me.
Oh, thanks, man. Yeah, you've been doing a lot of good stuff yourself, dude.
I'm trying, and I know you are too. And like I said, we've both come a long way since those Mercer days. And typically, when I get these discussions started, I'm asking people how they got started in the career. The thing is, I know how you got started, but for the benefit of the audience, can you tell everybody how you got into the self-funded industry?
Yeah, and you may not know exactly how I got started, actually, but I went to a college, local college here in Naperville, basically because my mom worked there and we got free college tuition.
Awesome.
Otherwise, I don't know if I would have gone to a 4-year school. And I have an identical twin brother. It's kind of part of my identity, and we shared a lot of classes in college. We had the same advisor, and we were both have always been really good at math. And our advisor in college, when we were like, "What the heck should we do for a
Yeah.
living?" We thought we'd be, building homes. She's like, "You guys should go down the actuarial path. It's a low stress, high paying job." I was like, "Oh, all right, let's do this." So
In.
yeah, and then my dad had a cousin in the industry who worked at Mercer, and he was who got me in the door for an interview to intern at Mercer, and it kind of all fell into place from there.
And who is that?
Ken Simic.
Oh, right. Okay.
Yeah, technically we figured it out with Joe Rody. Technically, he's my first cousin once removed, I think, is
That's right.
how that works.
So you went down the actuarial path at school, but you've taken like a right turn in your career, and you're not really going down the actuarial path, but you're using your math skills. Can you tell everybody about what you're doing today in your
Yeah,
career?
yeah. I got through a few of the exams, and then I just, I was like, I think I can do what I want to do without going through these exams. So I was fortunate to have a really good teacher at Mercer, Ken Magino, and
Yep. Ken was
um,
on season one.
yeah, so he taught me a lot about underwriting, and I just kind of latched onto it because
Yeah.
I have always loved math and kind of stayed down that path and just stayed on the underwriting side, and then kind of slowly worked my way into kind of cost containment solutions. And I really started to kind of like what I was doing
Yeah.
behind the scenes, and led me to a few different paths down the road, and ultimately where I'm at today.
Yeah. So where are you at today, and what is it that you do?
Yeah, so I don't call myself a benefits consultant or an advisor. I mean, technically, I am in a production or a sales role, but I got into it um, really because a few years ago I started doing some different things with health plans. I found this company called Health Rosetta, a small company but dedicated to kind of transforming the U.S. healthcare system one employer at a time. And I started, learning a lot about why the healthcare system was broken. And when I started learning about why it was broken, it became pretty clear on how to fix it. And I started implementing some of these practical fixes on my clients, which were somewhat similar to what I've been doing, but different types of partners within the health plan. And I started seeing different results,
Yeah.
and like positive results. For the first time, RX trend going in the opposite direction. And
Mm.
I actually started enjoying my job. While I like math, while I like being in Excel and building models, it's not, insurance was never my passion. And I started enjoying my job as I started implementing some of these fixes, and I realized it was because I was exercising one of my real passions, which is remodeling. I was remodeling health plans.
Yeah.
I've always enjoyed kind of taking something apart, typically with my hands. In this case, a little bit different, but then putting it back together better. I've always gotten a lot of satisfaction out of that. You know, whether it was working at Home Depot, flipping pizzas at Dan's
Yeah.
Pizza here, or in the insurance industry. And so that's when I really started liking my job, and I decided, you know what, I want to move into the sales role because it's going to afford me the opportunity to work with the clients that I want to work
Yeah.
with, the ones that want to do some things that are different.
So I remember when we were both at Mercer, we were working on some pretty large clients, like over 10,000 lives.
Yep,
And when my career shifted more into like the mid-market space, I got more into stop loss as a product. And that's a product that's more for employers that are like 250 employee lives up to like 5,000. And you just start learning that those employers in that segment, they have different needs than those big jumbos we used to work on.
they do.
But you can actually implement a lot of changes. They're easier to implement at smaller companies than they are at bigger companies. Do you have an opinion on that?
Yeah, no, I would agree with you, man. I've found that call it the 100 to 1,000 or 2,000, whatever the bottom and upper range is, it is a underserved market. You got all these solutions that the big companies can implement if they want, but there's a lot of people to answer to, right?
Yeah,
You got your HR, and then you got all the different HR managers underneath them that are controlling different locations. But when you get down to these smaller employers, one, they have a real need to save money,
yeah,
at times, and they're willing, to do things different. And the fact is like maybe they have one HR manager, not a team of 40. So it becomes a little bit easier to implement some of these things,
sure.
and they have a big impact right away. So that market I think is underserved, but I think needs these kind of things the most.
So when I hear you talk, it seems like you really enjoy what you do. What is it about this career path that like you really enjoy?
It started that couple of years ago. What I really enjoy right now is the fact that this industry is just absolutely littered with opportunity.
Yeah,
um, you know, Taking these small employers and doing different things with them. But like really it's the kind of taking apart a health plan and putting it back together, like seeing something that has been relatively stagnant for the past, 30 years. And I'm talking about like your traditional fully insured plans, your self-funded plans that have everything all under, the same roof. Like now, you have the ability to put in different pieces that fill different needs, and I really enjoy that part of it, the
yeah,
remodeling portion of it, like understanding what's going on within the plan, and then implementing things that can directly impact that,
sure.
implementing solutions that can directly impact that. So I love being able to do that. I relate it back to like, when I'm remodeling my kitchen or my bathroom, it's like, what's not working. And if you're doing the work yourself, well, like, okay, I'm going to address that problem when I fix it. So I love that piece of it. Is
Sure.
there's always going to be opportunities in this industry to change something for the better because there's a ton of innovation.
I would agree with that. There is a ton of innovation and it does make the job a lot of fun, but every day is not roses and sunshine, right? So what's the aspect of this career path that you're not so thrilled about?
Yeah, with what I'm doing today, we talked at the beginning of the episode, right? Like you might look at some of the stuff I do and say, oh, this is like anti-buca, anti-big carrier, and
Yeah,
that's not where I'm coming from. But the reason I bring that up is because it's really hard in this industry to do things differently sometimes, to fight against these big entities, um, that have all these processes in place. And so I find myself doing these things for clients and saving, patients a lot of money and saving clients about a lot of money. But at the end of the day, like it's really hard to do. It's
Yeah.
sometimes it's just like a data request that you feel like, hey, this is my client's data, and it's so hard to get depending on what you want, right? You're constantly met with this level of pushback of trying to get what you want so you can do a great analysis for a client. But it's
Sure.
just this pushback that it's exhausting
Yeah.
sometimes.
Yeah. You're fighting you're like climbing a uphill all the time in this industry. That's what it feels like.
You are, and I'm not anti-buka. I don't blame the carriers, but I also recognize that you know, you got these huge companies that have been built over time, and they have these, systems in place. It's cultural systems that are in place and processes that are in place. And there's good people within there, but there's still this
Yeah.
system behind it that is driving it. And it's that system, not the people, the system that are hard to fight.
Okay, so let's put that system to the side for a second because you're trying to do some things different, right? And you mentioned being able to install programs and find savings for employers and for patients. So can you give us like one or two examples of what's working? What do you feel like is like a simple thing that employers in that down market to middle market space can easily administer and implement?
Yeah, hands down, the number one thing I would tell employers to do is to carve out their prescription drugs to an independent pharmacy benefit manager. And when I say independent, I mean not owned by a major insurance carrier, right? So you have
Okay.
United Healthcare owns Optum RX, CVS owns Aetna, and then Cigna owns ESI, and those three PBMs control 80% of the market share. So moving to an independent model where it's very, very clear within a written contract how they get paid ends up, I would say, saving 20 to 30% on prescription drugs every single time.
Wow.
And it also opens the door for some additional programs that you can implement that can be free to the member. And those programs are targeted on your highest cost drugs. And so there's a ton of opportunity there. And, you know, I would tell you that these days there's really not much disruption at all of these independent pharmacy benefit managers. I mean, you got access to the same pharmacies. You have more programs that you can use, but it's not a big carrier name. So if there's one thing that employers are usually hesitant about, it's that, hey, it's not Blue Cross, it's not United, Cigna, Aetna, it's a different carrier. But hands down, the biggest opportunity with like little to no disruption at all on behalf of a member.
Yeah. So why is it that you think that employers don't make that move? Is it just branding? Is it that the big carriers have a better brand presence and they're more I don't know what the right word is, but they're more entrenched with the broker community to push forward that message?
I think, yes, that's part of the answer, but I think what the root cause really is just a fear of change, a natural fear of change. You know, I do a lot of educational videos.
Yeah.
And one of the videos I talk about is like when COVID first happened. I was literally one of those guys like getting my groceries home and
Yeah.
spraying disinfectant all over it, and then washing it so then we could eat it. Why? It's because like we had no idea
Right.
what was going on at that time, and so we
Right.
were all acting out of fear. Well, even something as simple as carving out the prescription drugs, like if these big three entities are controlling 80% of the market, like to move over here, like employers are fearful of doing that because
Sure.
they just don't know about it. It's a natural reaction. Why isn't everybody doing it?
Yeah.
And so it's that fear of change is the number one thing I think that holds employers back. And I think you solve that fear of change through education.
So speaking of which, you do spend a lot of time on LinkedIn with educational videos. I've interacted with you on some of those topics, and I know like one of the places you're passionate about is self-funding, especially like down market. I've seen you talk about, plan sponsors moving from fully insured to self-funding and even level funded programs. So give us a sense of like what's the right size in your mind for an employer to think about going some level of self-funding, maybe traditional self-funding or even maybe like a level funded product.
Yeah, great question. So, let me start with level funded.
Hmm.
I think level funded is a really good option for employers to kind of dip their toe in the water. I mean, you and I both know that level funded is really just it's self-funded dressed up, a little bit differently. But from a level funded standpoint, I'd say, go down to 25 employees. And the reason I say 25 is because a lot of times that's the threshold that a carrier will place on what they'll actually do for a level funded plan. But they operate from a financial perspective very much like a fully insured program. So an employer that is afraid of a little risk on the self-funding side or just is not comfortable going that way, moving into a level funded arrangement can be a really good first step for them. And because you could start to actually get some good data within your health plan to understand what's going on and eventually be able to address some of those issues. Maybe that's a stepping stone into self-funding at some point. But I'd say down to 25 employees. And then when you talk about going into a fully self-funded arrangement, a couple of things need to happen. One, I think you got to have an employer that's just like they're a little frustrated, right? They're ready to try something different to make a move. Now, if you're a 500 employer and you're fully insured, like I'm just gonna go out and say like you should probably be self-funded.
Sure.
But if you're a 75 life employer, you could be on the fence of which way that you wanted to go. But like I don't know, my in the back of my head, like 75 is always the number where like if you got 75 enrolled on your health plan, that's where
Yeah.
I'm seriously starting to consider self-funding. That being
Okay.
said, Mabe, I do have a 35 life self-funded group.
You do.
I
Okay.
do.
Okay. And any stories behind that? Like any volatility that employer felt that maybe had them reconsidering and not wanting to go down that path anymore?
Yeah, actually. So this particular employer, they fully bought into what I would call a completely remodeled health plan.
Okay.
So the complete opposite of what we think from a traditional BUCA standpoint, right? BUCA, Blue Cross United, Cigna, Aetna. This employer went to a self-funded arrangement 7/1 of 2022, and the reason is because one, we were showing some solutions that were going to significantly impact the care that people were getting. We were projecting a financial savings over time, and when we looked at like the max cost, things lined up in such a way where it made sense for them to move. And then they hit their first year self-funded, and they hit their aggregate attachment point.
Mm,
And I've only seen in my career probably about 5 employers that have hit their aggregate attachment point, although it seems like
okay.
it's becoming a little bit more common lately. But they had a terrible first year. Now they still ended up better than they would have under a fully insured or level funded arrangement because we had that aggregate attachment point or that aggregate stop loss in place. But I'd be lying if I told you they weren't questioning should we go back fully insured the second year. But they
Yeah.
ended up sticking it out, and now they're going into their actually today they start their third year of self funding.
Okay. Yeah, I guess what scares me about self-funding down to that level, you mentioned the aggregate, and right now, GLP-1s are just crazy in terms of utilization, and those can cost, eight to $15,000 per person per year, and it just takes a handful of those in a population, a 35 life group, for you to hit the ag. What's your take on that?
Yeah, I'm with you there, right? Like this particular employer has a $40,000 specific deductible, right? And so that GLP-1s can be almost meeting that entire deductible there. So
Yeah,
it's a big deal. I think us as consultants, we need to be talking to our employers about what they want to do from a GLP-1 strategy. And you got to think about it, right now you got it can be used for diabetes, but then it can be used for weight loss as
yeah,
well. And then down the line, right? Like that's what we're talking about today. Down the
yes,
line, whole nother thing. But I think we got to be talking to our employers about like what do you want to use this for? And
yeah,
so
exactly.
a strategy that a lot of my employers have been taking is to exclude it right now for
Wow.
weight loss. Not
Okay.
for diabetics, but for specifically for that weight loss category.
So I see you on LinkedIn. I see you making videos and you're doing the educational thing. So what kind of prompted you to go down that path and make videos that you're putting online?
Yeah. So I hired a sales coach a whole year before I got into sales. I had
Okay.
this I had this idea, and I had been following this guy on LinkedIn for a long time. And this idea had been kind of percolating in my head about, creating a brand and going out there and doing something different because, a guy that starts off on the actuarial path is somebody maybe that from an outside perspective isn't destined to be in a sales role.
Yeah.
And so I've never thought I'd be in sales, but I always knew if I ever did go and do it, it would have to be something I believed in.
Okay.
And so I had hired a sales coach to help me build this brand, and a big part about that brand is putting out videos, right? Putting
Yeah.
out things on LinkedIn, wherever, so people know who you are and what you're about. And I've used that branding as a way to try to build credibility on myself because I have a strong technical background.
Yes.
But I honestly I found myself like after getting over the editing yourself and watching yourself back, in videos
Yeah.
and how painful that can be. I'm kind of numb to it right now. I found myself really enjoying the education piece of it. It's been
Yeah.
something I have been doing my entire career in some way, shape, or form. And I found it creating a better consultant out of me too. So
Yeah. I
that
mean,
has kind of kept me doing it.
you're just doing what you do at scale, right?
Yeah.
And I see you in front of the whiteboard all the time. It's great. You can only get to so many people if you're calling employers, you're calling prospects. But using this method, you probably get to a lot more potential opportunities that way.
Yeah, yeah. You think about it from a prospecting perspective, right? You're setting one meeting at a time versus maybe you do a webinar or maybe you do like an employer event or a video post on LinkedIn. Think about how many
Yeah,
eyeballs see that versus just one meeting at a time.
that's exactly right. That's exactly right. So, what's something that you think is going to be very different in our industry over like the next 5 years?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I could go a lot of different ways on that, but I do strongly believe that the Consolidated Appropriations Act is currently reshaping our industry. And I think our industry is going to start to look very different in the next 5 years because of that.
Okay.
I think the biggest thing I would say is networks as we know it today, I really do feel like will start to shift. I do not think networks will go away by any means, but I think what we're going to start to see more of are wrap networks as opposed
Okay.
to like a full replacement network. And you're going to start to see this third tier move into a plan design, which I'll call like a tier zero, which is
Okay.
maybe you go out and you get a direct contract, or maybe there's a diabetic program you can implement for somebody who has ongoing diabetes, and you make that free. But this tier zero where everything's kind of free for people, where you know the price and the quality of a procedure up front, and then you wrap it with a big national carrier network.
Yeah, I mean that I'm not going to argue with that. I think networks are going to be challenged in the next 3 to 5 years, especially with transparency data, especially with like these non-network programs like reference-based pricing. And a lot of those programs are showing a lot of savings, especially if you're a stop loss carrier, because you're talking about like the biggest claims being reduced by like 20 to 30%. So I'm with you. I think networks could be challenged over the next few years.
Yeah, agreed.
Yeah. Well, why don't we shift into some more like rapid fire type of questions? Are you ready for these?
Yeah,
All right. So, what are like three words that best describe a career in stop loss self funding reinsurance landscape?
yeah, I'd say dynamic is always a word I've used.
All right.
Technical for sure. I mean, this is a highly technical topic, right? Like
Yeah.
there's little bits and pieces that are baked into a contract. You got to understand what's going on, and then ultimately, I would say de-risk, because that's what you're really trying to do with an appropriate stop loss policy is de-risk a plan,
Okay.
and that's where it gets fun.
All right. So, obviously, we see a lot on LinkedIn, but where can we find the personal Mike? Is it on TikTok, Snapchat, or Instagram?
Neither, none of them, none of
Yeah.
them. So if you want to find the personal mic, I'll tell you, for the most part, you're getting the personal mic on LinkedIn. I mean,
Yeah.
you'll see some personal posts from me every once in a while, and before I started doing educational videos, that was really pretty much the majority of what I did.
Yeah.
I try to do one every once in a while, but even the videos that I'm doing from an educational perspective, that's Mike in a client meeting. Like I'm not different on those videos
Yeah.
than I am in a client meeting. What you see is what you get. You get passion. You get technical. Um, that's me. I mean,
Yeah.
what you see is what you get on LinkedIn.
I like that. I like that. All right. What about somebody who's getting started in this career path? Would you advise them to go down like the consulting brokerage path? Would you advise them to go down like the traditional carrier slash TPA path? Or would you advise them to go through like the new school solutions, call it like point solutions, RBP, direct primary care? There's these whole new set of solutions that are out there. Somebody getting started in the career, where would you direct them to?
Selfishly, I'm gonna say the advisory role, but for a very specific reason.
Okay.
I think being in a broker advisory role, at least as you're kind of starting off, like you get to see everything, right? You get to see what the carriers are doing. You get to see all these point solutions. You get to see how it works from a consultant standpoint. Like if you're in a position where you're not really sure where to start, like if you want to go start at a carrier, go start at a carrier. But if you're
Yeah.
not sure where you want to start, go start at a broker consultant, because it's going to give you the widest range of what's out there for you to decide, like, what do you like to do
Yeah.
and what are you good at, and then go do that. Because I mean, I've seen people go from a consultant role over to the carrier side, right? And I think it's because of the career that they had led them to that point.
Yeah.
And you may always stay in an advisory role, but it'll give you the most exposure.
Yeah. Good. Good. I think I already know the answer to this one, but what's one of your biggest passions outside of work?
Yeah, for sure. I probably a couple, but the biggest one is remodeling.
Yeah.
I mean, me and my brother owned our own remodeling business in college. He still owns that business today, although he's just doing cabinet making. I grew up with it. I had a dad who was in manufacturing. We grew up in a blue collar home. We were fixing stuff ourselves. I've just always enjoyed taking stuff apart and putting it back together. And it's pretty stressful
Yeah.
remodeling a bathroom or a kitchen when you have three little kids and a wife and a full-time job and sports and all this other stuff, but there is just the level of satisfaction and accomplishment that I feel like I get after doing a project is huge for me.
Yeah, we're going through a major renovation right now. So, two bathrooms getting torn up and redone, staircase getting torn up and redone, carpets coming out, hardwood floors going in. We're living through all types of dust. And I am perfectly fine paying somebody else to do it because I have this fear of screwing that up. And I know like today you could like watch a bunch of videos on how to do tiling and stuff. I don't want to experiment on my own home. And I also don't have enough time to put into that, but I can see why somebody else would be super passionate about it.
Yeah, and I totally understand where you're coming from. I look at it and it's like I have a fear of somebody else screwing it up, not myself.
Yeah.
Like if I screw it up, I'm okay. And trust me, I've screwed up a couple things here and there, but yeah, I have a hard time hiring somebody when like I know I could do the job better myself,
Sure.
you know.
Sure. All right, so we're both really big Bears fans. So give me the outlook on the season.
You know, I think I think we make the playoffs. I think
Yeah,
we I think
I
we
like
barely
that.
make I think we barely make the playoffs, but I think we probably struggle within the first part of the season as everybody's just kind of gelling together.
Yeah.
I think the Bears are kind of blessed this year in the fact that we play every divisional game in the second half of the season.
Yes.
So by the time the second half of the season hits, hopefully we're locked and loaded and we're ready to go. I mean, you cannot argue the natural talent that is on the Bears right now. And from a
Yeah.
fan perspective, like I'm pretty excited about the next, 5, 10, 15 years for the Bears.
I am
So
too. I am too, but I was a Justin Fields guy. I am sad to see him go. I will follow that guy in the rest of his career, but I'm officially on the Caleb bandwagon too.
yeah, that's pretty much where I'm at. It kind of felt like we
Yeah.
broke up with them,
Yeah.
and there was a little guilt there. I didn't
Yeah.
I didn't I didn't want to see him go, but from what I've been reading and everything, I feel like we made the right decision.
Yeah, good. Good. All right, I'm gonna give you my toughest question of the day.
Well, what's that?
This one comes up every discussion. Tell me your feelings on working from home, because today we have a lot of new entrants into our career, and we have a lot of people that are exiting the space too. And so knowledge transfer is extremely important, and some would argue it's happening when people are in the office versus those that say that it's perfectly fine when it's remote. What's your take?
Um, I'll start with like I'm kind of old school. Like I'm in the office every day. Now,
Okay.
granted, like I literally work across the street from my house,
Yeah.
and I have three boys at home, and it's summer, so coming into the office is really good for me, right? I can
Yeah.
I can separate things pretty easily. Um, so I like working in the office, but I also recognize there's a lot of people that work really well working from home. So
Yeah.
I'm not against work from home. What I am against is, I mean, you asked about people that are coming into the industry. I
Yeah.
think about people coming out of college. I don't think we're doing them a service if we say work from home 5 days a week.
Yeah.
I think with those folks in particular, where you learn is when you walk over to the person next to you and you
Yes.
sit down and you start talking. The fact is that like I don't care if you got Slack or Teams or whatever it is, and the phone, like you do not get the same interaction unless you're physically talking to somebody. You can read their body language and you're
Yeah.
taking that time. So I think for people that are coming out of college, like you got to be in the office at least 3 days a week. Sure, there's
Yeah.
going to be days where you can probably just grind at home on some things that you got to do, but like you need that interaction. That's what's going to make you better. And if you want to get better, like that's what you got to do.
I remember when I started at Mercer, and the project they put every new actuary on is NetPick, right? It's the network evaluation of different carriers. And like people like you and Tyler and Corey, you guys were like the masters of this stuff. But like day one, when you walk in and somebody's like, hey, this is what you got to do, like you're like, what the hell am I doing? And it was, I mean, if it wasn't for the fact that you guys sat around the corner and you had somebody to go ask, like, hey, you got to show me like what buttons to push, but you also got to help me understand like what the hell is going on here.
Yeah,
I don't know how you replicate that today in the remote environment.
me neither. I mean, you talk about Tyler. Like I learned so much from Tyler Hershey, about like building Excel models, and
Yeah,
it was because like the two of us sat next to each other and worked from 7:30 in the morning until 9 o'clock at night, for
yeah,
5 years straight. Like,
yeah,
like I could just like lean over and be like, "Hey, dude, what do you think about this?" And
yeah,
you're right there. So it's huge, man. It had a
yeah.
huge impact on my career.
I totally agree. All right, I'm going to give you a chance to flip the script now, and you can ask me a question on anything you want to know.
Yeah, so I'm gonna be a little selfish here and actually
Yeah,
ask you a stop loss question.
sure.
I'm kind of really curious from your perspective, like where you see the stop loss market going, specifically with. I mean, I sat on a webinar a while back, made for a captive, and
Yeah,
they showed these charts of the gene therapy treatments that are out today and the gene therapy treatments that would be out within like the next 5 years and the
yeah,
gene therapy treatments which would be out in like the next 10. And I looked at that chart and thinking about the cost of some of these therapy treatments today. And I'm like, man, in 5, 10 years, like nobody's going to be talking about a specialty prescription drug.
yeah,
That like it's going to be how do we manage these gene therapy treatments? And I look at them. Today it might be treating something, for like 1 in 1,000 people have it, or 1 in 10,000 people have it. But
yeah,
when you start talking about some of these other things it's going to apply for, there's not going to be a self-funded employer that's not going to hit one of these at some point eventually. So I just like, how does the stop loss market prepare for something like this, not having any maximums at all anymore on
yeah.
a policy?
No, it's a good question. So I think the stop loss market has basically gotten a reprieve for the past few years because gene therapies were really starting to pop up in 2018, 2019. And the thought was there was this big wave that was going to hit in 2020, in 2021. But what happened was we had COVID, and the FDA shifted from reviewing and approving gene therapies to reviewing and approving COVID vaccinations, right? And so that wave that was expected kind of got pushed back to 2022. It really started materializing in 23, but really it still hasn't hit that peak. So even though we have a lot of therapies that are out there, they're not being utilized to the rate that manufacturers expected. And at some point that's going to happen. And when it does, it's going to mean a lot of expense for reinsurers and stop loss carriers. So I think in general, there's too many stop loss carriers right now, and there's too many reinsurers that are backing those stop loss carriers. And so what'll end up happening is some of those players will exit the market because they won't be able to keep up with those expenses. They're never going to be able to collect enough premium to offset some of those risks if you're a very small player. So you see this in other industries. You start seeing consolidation at some point, right? And I think that's going to happen in the stop loss space because in order to protect from that risk, you need larger risk pools. And I won't go so far as to say like Medicare for all, but if you think about that concept, that is the biggest risk pool you could have, and you could spread the cost over everybody. Now, the commercial markets and all the players that are in that won't necessarily want to go down that path, right? But the only way to really protect from those types of risks is to have larger risk pools. And the only way to do that is smaller. I think smaller carriers will get gobbled up, and I think that there's going to be some consolidation in the space.
Yeah, that's an interesting perspective. I mean, we've
Yeah,
seen consolidation pretty much in every other space within
we have.
healthcare except for stop loss at this point, I guess.
That's right. So, Mike, let's get you out of here with one last question. Just give me one piece of advice for somebody getting started new in our industry.
Yeah, that's simple. That's pretty simple from my perspective. I would just tell people to like be yourself.
Yeah,
I, I would say for like the first 10 to almost, I'd say maybe even 15 years, like until I came here, I would see other people that I thought were successful and I tried to do things that emulated them. And that's not wrong, but I sometimes would find myself going outside of like where I felt was the right way to go.
yeah,
And just kind of struggled where to go. And I would just tell people like if you want to have success in this industry, like the best way to do that is to differentiate yourself by just being yourself. Like don't try to be somebody else and what they're
yeah,
doing. Like bring your personality into it.
yeah.
Find out what your strengths are and play to your strengths, because you're going to end up liking your job a heck of a lot more if you play to
Sure.
your strengths, you love what you do, and you just be yourself. And I think, for anybody going out and trying to find a career, you've got to think about what is actually going to make you happy, and what does success mean to you. It doesn't
Yeah,
it doesn't mean to everybody, making the most amount of money. Like just try to be happy doing what you're doing and the money will follow
that's
eventually.
right. That's right. Well, that's a great piece of advice, Mike, and we'll close it up there for today. Thanks for joining me on Firm and Final.
Sounds good, Meg. Good to see you, man. Thanks for having me on the show, dude. I appreciate it.
You got it, man. Take care.
All right, you too. Bye.